I'm a very unlikely person to be a meditation teacher. Very unlikely in the traditional sense of what we think meditation teachers would be. I've been practicing transcendental meditation for 45 years. I'm 64 years old. I started as an 18-year-old at the University of California at Berkeley. I've been teaching it for 42 years. I taught it at a time when you wouldn't even want to tell people that you taught meditation. I go along with my Uncle Arthur, Uncle Morty and Uncle Arthur, where 40 years ago, if I told him I taught, and he was a Freudian psychiatrist, and I said, psychoanalyst, and I said, you know, Uncle Morty, I'm teaching meditation. He said, that's crazy, it's a sect. And then 10 years later was, well, that's pretty interesting. I run for an hour on the beach, and then I fall face down into the sand, and that's my meditation. And then, you know, a few years ago, he blasted me for never teaching him to meditate. And that just, Uncle Morty tracks the acceptance and mainstreaming of meditation. How many people here have tried some form of meditation at some point? Let me just tell you quickly where this all started for me. I grew up in a very political family in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1950s and 1960s. I like to say my family was so political that I actually knew for a fact that I was a Democrat long before I knew I was Jewish. And that was the truth. I mean, that was the time, and we discussed politics all the time. Judaism didn't even enter into it until it was time to get bar mitzvahed. I worked for Senator Robert Kennedy. When he was assassinated, I went to the University of California at Berkeley in 1968 with the intention to going to Bolt Law School and becoming a United States Senator like Senator Kennedy. I was raised, and I still feel it at the time, it was sort of maybe naive in the 60s, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, that I wanted to change the world. I wanted to do something of substance to change the world, and it was going to be through politics. But where I lived at Berkeley, on Parker and Benvenue, if anybody knows that, I had tanks parked outside my door, tear gas, the whole situation was out of control. My fascination with politics ebbed. And then I started thinking, although I'm still a political junkie, it wasn't where I was going to put all my heart and soul. I decided that I would get into education and get a doctorate in education and write educational curriculum and change the world that way. Along the way, my father had me going to school full-time, working full-time, craziness. Somebody said, you should learn transcendental meditation. And I said, not on your life. I am, by nature, and continue to be, an extremely skeptical person about just about everything. I am data-driven. I don't want to have to believe in anything on face value. And I said, not interested. Wasn't even in my vocabulary. But he said, you don't have to believe in anything. You'll be 100% skeptical. It'll give your body deep rest. It'll wake up your brain. It'll help with what you're doing. So I learned, 18 years old, 1969. And within a week, it was such a profound experience for me, this doubting, skeptical, know-it-all 18-year-old kid, that the thought came, I would like to teach this to kids, in particular inner-city school kids, because that was what my focus was. So I became a teacher of transcendental meditation, and I taught it at San Quentin Prison in 1974. I was the first person to teach it to all 50 men on death row. And I taught it at Fremont, at the General Motors plant in Fremont. And time went on, and I've taught thousands and thousands of people. And then 9 years ago, David Lynch, the filmmaker, and I got together to establish the David Lynch Foundation to bring transcendental meditation to at-risk school kids. And in the last 9 years, we've provided scholarships for over 500,000 kids in underserved schools throughout the United States, all over Latin America, the Middle East, Africa. We're now working with the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration, and we're providing it to veterans and their families who suffer from post-traumatic stress, a very contagious disorder, as you all know. And in context of what President Carter said, we're now working very closely with women and children who are survivors of domestic violence. So the big question is, how did we get here? How did meditation become so sort of mainstream? Why are we talking about it here at this venue? 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I doubt it. My experience after 42 years is not interested, not interested, not interested, little bumps, bumps, and then in the last year or two, in addition to the work we're doing with at-risk populations out of New York, we're working with the National Football League, we're working with Ray Dalio, and maybe some of you know him, a top hedge fund, many hedge funds. We can't keep up with the demand on Wall Street. I think it is a result of 3 things. One, it's like a perfect storm. One, the epidemic of stress. As a matter of fact, a top HR firm in the United Kingdom just called workplace stress the Black Plague of the 21st century. Why? Because modern medicine has no way to prevent it and no way to cure it. That's number one. Black Plague of the 21st century. The California Endowment just came out and said that trauma and toxic stress, the number one health epidemic in America today among at-risk kids. Second reason, mentioned it a moment ago, there is no conventional approach. I mean, we feel like we are swimming in an ocean of stress. Anybody feel anxious? Anybody have difficulty sleeping sometimes? Anybody feel sort of overcome by, it's just natural. So the conventional approach is not working. And the third strategy, thank God, science. Because science has come along and demystified a technique that for me was never mystical. For me was always practical, down to earth, no bullshit, a simple thing I could sit down, learn it in a few hours, sit down, close my eyes, and access a level of rest and relaxation in my body that research shows is deeper than many parts of the deepest part of deep sleep, that reduces cortisol levels by 30 to 40%. Cortisol is a stress hormone. A good night's sleep, maybe 10 to 12%. That increases serotonin, that increases prolactin, that reduces blood pressure, according to the American Heart Association, more effectively than any other relaxation technique, and actually on a par with antihypertensive medication without any hazardous side effects. And most interesting to me, the effect that it has on the brain. Every experience changes the brain. There's a part of the brain, and I'm talking to a lot of people who know this, called the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobes. It's about the size of your fist. It's right behind your forehead here. And what it does is it's executive functioning. It's the higher self. It governs decision-making, judgment, planning, problem-solving, sense of self, intuition. And you know what takes it offline? Stress, anxiety, fatigue. Does a stressed person make good decisions? Does an anxious person have good judgment? No. And what they found is that and I'm going to explain it, and I see my time there. What they found is that when we sit and meditate, when the active thinking mind settles down, the body takes a profound state of rest, you can see on the EEG machine and you can see it on the brain scans, the neural pathways, the connections between the front of the brain and the back of the brain, and the connections between the left and right hemispheres of the brain. Those connections, those neurons, fire together. And they say, when the neurons fire together, they wire together. And because of the neuroplasticity of the brain, when we sit and meditate and the brain makes those connections, they last in activity. We maintain it and we make better decisions, better judgment, better planning. We're more ourself. Here's the analogy. You're on a little boat and you're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And all of a sudden, huge waves, big swells. And you could think, oh my God, the whole ocean is in upheaval. But if you could somehow do a cross-section of the ocean out there, and you'd see these 40-foot high swells, and you'd realize that the ocean in reality is a mile deep. in reality is a mile deep. This is natural, but this is equally natural. And the depth of the ocean, pretty darn silent. Surface of the ocean, active. The analogy, our mind. Just the analogy. Surface of the mind, the thinking, active thinking mind. I call it the gotta mind. Tell me if any of you have this. I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to call him, and I got to call her, and I got to make a list, then I got to find the list, then I got to make a new list, and I got to slow down, and I got to get going, and I got to get to sleep, and I got to get up. Anybody? And it's a natural instinct that we'd like to have some inner calm, some inner stability, some inner clarity, some inner focus, some inner peace. Natural. 2 questions. Is there such a thing as an inner? And if so, how do we get there? So in this meditation, transcendental meditation, we hypothesize that there's a level of the mind deep within every one of us. Every one of us. This is just a hypothesis. Right now, level of the mind that is already calm, settled, peaceful, wide awake. My own self, there. Just like the ocean has quiet. And meditation, properly taught and learned, and it's not difficult, and I'd be happy to teach you, because this meditation you can have all the thoughts, the gotta thoughts you want in the world. It's very difficult to clear the mind of thought. This meditation just allows the active thinking mind to settle down and experience quieter levels of thought and quieter levels of thought. And how do we know that? Because of science, because of the body, because of the deep rest that the body takes. Reduction in oxygen consumption, reduction in cardiac output, across the board. I would love to teach everyone this meditation right now, but it takes time. But what I am going to do is I'm going to not teach you a meditation. There are things called guided meditation, and I don't really know how to do those, where you imagine a brook or I get restless with that, or a forest or something like that. This meditation is more physiological. But there's a wonderful tool that ancient Ayurveda, anybody heard of Ayurveda? Ancient Ayurveda practice, mind-body, which you can do, which just puts your mind and your body back together. You know, sometimes we're so stressed, we think we're hungry, but we're not. We self-medicate through food. There's like a break. So in just one moment, I'm going to teach you a little 1-minute pulse diagnosis, but I want to go back and finish up with one story of why I'm so passionate about working with the David Lynch Foundation. In South San Francisco, in San Francisco, there are now 5,000 kids in some of the toughest schools that start and end each day with 10 minutes of meditation, transcendental meditation, quiet time. The worst schools have become the best, and the superintendent there would like, Richard Carranza would like this meditation to be part of the curriculum of all the schools in San Francisco. Little girl in the Visitation Valley, Charmaine, comes to school one morning, the highest crime area, comes to school, out of breath, runs into class so she gets there in time to meditate, red paint splattered all over her dress. And the teacher says, Charmaine, you got to go home. You can't wear this, dirty clothes, paint all over your dress. She bursts into tears. She had been standing at a bus stop next to her uncle, and her uncle was shot in a drive-by shooting, and that was his blood. And she ran to school because it was a safe haven, and she didn't want to miss her meditation. And when I heard that, I realized how many kids just like that all over the world suffer from trauma and stress. And we're not, we can get books and we can get computers, but if we don't give kids the tools to handle trauma and stress and ourselves, then the beautiful vision that particularly Eric was giving, and it's going to be even tougher. So, everybody, take your left hand and take your 3 fingers of your left hand and put them on your pulse right there. Now, I'm saying this is not meditation. This is like a health sort of thing. So I don't want you to think, I did some weird meditation with my pulse. That's not that. But this is a lovely thing because it allows our mind to connect with the blood that courses through our body. So close your eyes. This is just going to take a minute. Don't feel weirded out. And just let your attention through your fingers be with your pulse. Okay. There's a level of life under those waves. I encourage you to access it. Thank you very much.